You ever get that feeling? Like someone's watching you? Maybe it's late at night, the house is quiet, and yet, something feels off. What if I told you that sometimes, those feelings aren't just paranoia? They're warnings. Tonight, I'll share stories that aren't born from imagination but from real events, terrifying encounters that left people scarred, haunted, and forever changed. Let's start with one that still sends chills down my spine. Story 1, The Silent Stalker. Emma thought she was alone. She'd been living in her new apartment for 2 months. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small studio in an older building. The rent was cheap, and she liked the neighborhood. But from the moment she moved in, things didn't feel right. It began with small things: a light left on she swore she turned off, the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. Old buildings make noises, she told herself. That was until she woke up one night at 3 a.m. to the sound of someone breathing inside her room. Emma froze. She didn't move a muscle, barely breathing herself. In the dim light, she could make out the shape of someone standing in the corner, just watching her. She fumbled for her phone under the covers, her heart pounding so loudly she thought whoever was in the room would hear it. By the time she switched on the flashlight, the figure was gone. The door was still locked. No windows were open. But there was something else. The closet door, just slightly ajar, moved as if someone had been hiding behind it. Emma never stayed there again. She packed up the next day and left. A week later, police found out the previous tenant had reported strange occurrences as well. Turns out, the landlord had a troubled relative who had been sneaking into empty apartments, including Emma's. Story 2, The Whispering Woods. Jake was an experienced hiker, always seeking remote trails and quiet places to escape the rush of city life. One weekend, he decided to camp deep in the national park, an area known for its untouched wilderness. It was around midnight when he heard the first whisper. At first, Jake thought it was the wind, but the words became clearer, though he couldn't understand the language. He stepped out of his tent, shining his flashlight around, but the forest was still. He decided to shake it off, probably his imagination. Yet as he zipped his tent back up, he saw something in the distance, a figure standing just at the tree line. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But Jake felt like it was watching him. The whispers returned, louder this time, circling his tent. He couldn't see anyone, but he felt the presence closing in. Jake packed up and left before dawn. Months later, he found out that the area he camped in was believed to be haunted by the spirits of missing hikers who had vanished without a trace. Story 3, The Crying Baby. In 2009, Sarah and her husband bought an old farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. The place was charming but needed a lot of repairs. One night, while Sarah was alone, her husband working late, she heard the faint sound of a baby crying. Confused, she checked outside, thinking it might be an animal. But the crying seemed to echo inside the house, drifting down from the attic. The attic had been locked since they moved in. They didn't even have the key. Still, the sound persisted night after night. When Sarah's husband finally got around to prying open the attic door, they found something chilling: a small wooden cradle covered in dust, and beside it, an old, yellowed newspaper clipping about a woman who had lived there in the 1940s. The headline read, "Local woman and infant perish in house fire, tragic accident," or something more. Sarah never heard the crying again, but sometimes, late at night, she'd find the attic door slightly open. Story 4, The Vanishing Man. Derek was driving home late one evening after visiting friends out of town. It was a long stretch of highway, lined by thick forest on both sides. He hadn't seen another car for miles when he noticed a man walking along the side of the road, wearing old-fashioned clothes. Derek slowed down, rolling down his window to ask if he needed help, but as he did, the man suddenly disappeared right in front of his eyes. Shocked, Derek sped off. A few days later, he told a co-worker about the experience. The co-worker's face went pale. "You saw him," he said. Apparently, several drivers over the years had reported seeing the same man along that stretch of road. Local legend says he was a hitchhiker killed decades ago in a hit-and-run. They say he's still waiting for someone to give him a ride that will finally take him home. Story 5, The House on Maple Street. In the summer of 1997, Lisa and her friends dared each other to spend a night in an abandoned house at the edge of town. It was one of those places with countless rumors, haunted, they said. The house was decayed, graffiti scrawled across the walls, and the air felt thick. Around midnight, they heard footsteps on the second floor. Thinking it was just one of their friends trying to scare them, Lisa laughed it off. But then the footsteps grew louder, heavier. And when they turned to leave, the front door slammed shut. Lisa swears that as they tried to pry it open, she saw someone standing at the top of the stairs, a shadowy figure that didn't move but seemed to press down on them with its gaze. They finally got the door open and ran, not stopping until they were blocks away. Later, they found out the house had been boarded up the week before, yet somehow, the door had been wide open when they arrived. And sometimes, the scariest stories aren't the ones told around campfires. They're the ones that happen in the quiet corners of our lives, in ordinary places. When we least expect it. Lights, you'll hear something. A soft creak of a floorboard, a faint whisper that isn't quite the wind. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like this video and don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Also comment down about your vibes after watching this.